Hello, my loves. Welcome back this week. I took a few seconds before I dropped in on this episode to just connect with all of you, to feel your energy, because this episode's going to be a pretty vulnerable one for me. Um, there's just there's really no easy way to start this episode other than that I have some big changes that I want to announce this week around the podcast, around Substack. But before I do, I really felt deeply that I wanted to let you all behind the scenes with me into a very intimate look at what it has been like for me to try something, watch it fail, and go through the excruciatingly messy journey of finding the courage to pivot. And why I want to take the time to let you all in to that story and that piece is because as I've been digesting what is going to be an 8-month process that I'm going to be sharing with you all, I've noticed so many parallels to the process you guys are in right now with considering divorce. And I feel like I do my best teaching, I do my best sharing when I do my work, when I'm on the podcast, when I am able to bring my own life experiences to play. I think that's one of the reasons the podcast has been so impactful for so many of you is because I have such a level of transparency and authenticity here. And this has been something that I have been in the deep throes of for the last 8 months. And it's just been too raw to really be talking about or sharing here. It's something I'm always trying to understand and navigate on the podcast. Like, how much do I share? How much do I get to keep to myself? And I love beautiful moments like this when where I'm at in my process feels actually very aligned with my work, with the podcast, with some shift I'm making there. And I get to share and kind of open up some of my personal work to all of you in ways that I think will be very illuminating for your own processes. So that's a little, I guess, entry point to what I want to be talking about today. And that will hopefully prep you guys for the big decision that I'm going to be sharing with you all today on the podcast. So, to start us off, I want to just say that this is still very raw, still very in process for me, what I'm going to be talking about. And I think, that's just one of the beautiful pieces of being a human. I actually find, although I am a coach, although I know I am a leader in lots of ways, and I get to hold space for so many of my one-on-one clients, for the women in the community, I think it's always a great reminder to all of you that I am also just a human, also going through my own journey. And although I have lots of things that I feel like I've learned as I go through different revolutions and, versions of myself in the different phases of my growth, I find new and often difficult and exciting parts of myself. And in knowing that, I think a big piece that I wanted to preface this episode with was that a huge part of what I'm about to share, I believe, definitely comes from the core conditioning that I had as a child. And so for some of you, what I'm going to talk about, my experience with trying something, it not working out, and then quitting it, you may be like, oh my God, why is this so hard for her? But for me, I understand deeply that the journey I've been on the last 8 months really comes from growing up feeling very responsible for everything and everyone around me. And although I did not know that as clearly, I knew that a little bit before these 8 months. That's been one of the themes that has come through the most, is just the core conditioning I had around I need to be responsible for everyone and everything. It all depends on me. I also was taught through a very heavy fundamental religious lens in Mormonism. I have a very strong religious blueprint that there is something bigger in life that's kind of driving everything. And although I left Mormonism 6 years ago, it's still deep in my bones, unconsciously, the belief that when you're doing things right, things work out. And when you're doing things wrong, you're being punished, or somehow you've missed something, or you've done something bad. And I think it's important to know those two pieces before I dive in and share more of this, because some of you may not relate to those points, but some of you definitely will. Some of you that have been parentified in childhood or that came from fundamental Christian religions will really relate to that. And also, this will hopefully too give you guys some more perspective on life post-divorce. Because when we are in the process, at least, I think a beautifully, beautifully young, naive, open part of me, going through the divorce process, really thought, like, I'm going to make this decision and I'm going to trust myself, and then I'm always going to be able to trust myself, and life is just going to have this steady upwards trajectory. And yes, I'll go through tough things, but ultimately, like, nothing will ever be as tough as this moment again. That is not true. Life will serve you up, growth in its own ways in different versions. And for me, as I will talk about later, in some ways, this process of having to go through admitting a hard truth that something I'd picked was not working has been in some ways almost as difficult as my divorce was, but in a different way. Okay, so with that prep, because it's important when I share my story that you guys also remember, like, who I am, my history, remembering that I also have ADHD, all of those factor into the way I move through the world and the way the world moves through me. Now, let's get into what are we talking about, Britta? Right? I feel like I've been like hinting at this, right? Something is not working. I've got a big change coming up that I want to share with you all. So, as many of you that have been with the podcast for a while know, I launched on Substack, and in the beginning, it seemed like it was going really well. My subscribers were growing on Substack, but because I wasn't tracking my numbers, which is definitely not one of my strong suits in my business, that's that executive function piece of my ADHD. I understand that better now. I was not realizing that the numbers in my business were dropping. And I would not catch this for many, many months. Instead, in probably like November, December, what happened is I started to realize, like, oh, some of my revenue is dropping, but I'm not really tracking the numbers, but I'm still like seeing some stuff coming through in Substack. Instead of going to the numbers, instead of, a non-emotional response, I had a really big CPTSD trigger happen where I internalized all of this completely. So around December, I start moving into this internalization loop where my brain is like, wait a second. I thought moving to Substack would bring more financial safety, but this is actually doing the opposite. And the heart of this episode is also showing you guys that, other people would be like, okay, go check the numbers and just change. No, for those of us, as I'll get into this, that have trauma from cultural conditioning, abusive parents, what did I do? I internalized it as there must be something wrong with me. It's not that this choice was wrong. I must need to surrender more, or I'm just missing something. I just need to figure something out, or it's just like I need to hang on longer. A big thought was like, I trusted myself, so this should be working. This was the choice that made the most sense. We made this choice. We're going to stay with this choice. And I really got trapped in this cycle of believing that the failure was personal. And by the way, y'all, I had no idea this was going on at the time because wow, our brains are amazing. And boy, do our subconscious beliefs from our childhood, just if they get triggered deeply enough, do they run the show? And so I was in this deep cycle of thinking like, okay, I need to be more patient. I need to keep waiting, lots of self-analyzing, lots of like, what am I missing? And I imagine for some of you listening to this, right? I've made some kind of choice. And instead of just looking at the choice and going, maybe this choice isn't a fit, or maybe this choice doesn't work anymore, I'm internalizing it. I am imagining that may sound familiar for many of you because lo and behold, y'all, as I've been coming through all of this and starting to digest and look at all of it, what did I start to notice? But that, oh, just like I, in my business, decided to bring on, what I was calling a new revenue stream, something that I thought was going to help my business. Many of you in your marriages will do something similar when you're trying to introduce something new that you're hoping will make the marriage better, right? Maybe it's a new communication tactic. Maybe it's a marriage seminar. Maybe it's going to couples therapy. Or maybe you're finding yourself like, I'm going to compromise more. I'm going to change myself. And you introduce it thinking you are being responsible, very much like I did with Substack. Like, okay, this is going to be the thing. This is the answer. But we get so focused on this thing and on making this new thing work that we're not actually tracking the numbers behind the scenes. For me, that was like, okay, let's let's be tracking our revenue. Let's be tracking the amount of money we're making each month and how that's changing. For you, I would offer maybe you stop, you probably weren't in the first place, but maybe you're not tracking your core emotional baseline and your self-worth. Are those steadily over time plummeting behind the scenes? And so I want you to notice that just like I didn't, my first instinct in this moment wasn't to just look at, okay, we made this change and it may not be working. And so it may just be that this change we made isn't the right fit. Instead, our first instinct isn't often to look at like, oh, maybe the structure is broken. Instead, we look inward and we start telling ourselves, I just need to try harder. I just need to be more patient. I just need to surrender more. That is a key analogy as I go through talking about all of this for you guys to be paralleling and understanding as I share what I've been through these last 8 months, because goodness, is that not exactly what I see so many of you doing and what I did too. What I did in my marriage and what I definitely did with this Substack move as well. So keeping that analogy in mind, for the rest of the episode, I'm going to have 5 different sections that I found in my process that I think are really important for y'all getting to hear, especially from me, because I think of it this way of like, I meet many of you on 90 Minutes and you're, oh my God, it's so great to meet you. I'm so excited to meet you. And I know what that feels like when you have somebody that you admire and you're seeing their life. And often we have illusions about their life, right? Or who they are or what they know about the world. And I think it's so important for you as my listeners to this podcast to have moments like this where you really get to come with me behind the scenes and you get to see that even with all that I've learned, even with all the tools I know, I still have a human brain. And I still have a human brain that totally can get derailed by beliefs that I currently have operating that maybe I don't understand, childhood beliefs that get triggered and step up and take over the wheel. And I think there's something really powerful when people we will look up to, when people that we see as leaders or that we admire as peers, let us see that they also are in their own process, that they also have very human brains that make very human mistakes. So with that, I'm going to take you guys through these 5 different layers that I realized really apply and hopefully like bridge over to your journeys as well. So one of the first things that, as I was looking back over this process of, and you know, if you guys are like, what is this process, Britta? This process is the fact that I made a big change in my business that on a very simple level was not working for my business financially. And instead of just being able to look at that and go, oh, I made a mistake, let's pivot, I spent 8 months spiraling and internalizing to a very, very, very deep level. I will tell you later on in the episode how I was able to come out of this, like what was the moment that kind of brought me up out. But looking back over those 8 months and what happened to me has given me a lot of like, oh, here are some pieces that you guys might also be doing in your process of struggling with when life takes us to places we don't expect and we are really struggling with admitting, okay, this isn't working and we need to do something different. So the first one is what I consider to be a trauma response of hyper independence. Okay. And I'm so excited for later this month to give you guys a lot more content around patriarchy, to keep diving into educating you guys around that, because the books I've been reading recently, really in looking at this, you know, hyper independence that I saw come up, I'm like, oh, this is rooted in my trauma and this is rooted in the patriarchy. Because under patriarchal conditioning, women are, I would definitely say subliminally, but also overtly taught that if we want to step outside a traditional mold, whether that is trying to build a business, like what my experience was in this moment, or leaving a marriage, like what many of you are considering, we are taught that we have to be bulletproof. We are. We're taught that we have got to figure it out. There is no leeway. We cannot make mistakes. And I really do think there is a trauma response that comes up that is like, if I ask for help, if I admit that I don't know what I'm doing, I will look weak or I will expose myself to competition and judgment, which I don't even believe that's a thought. I mean, I know it's a thought, but I also want to like be very clear that for many of us, that has been the reality. Many of us have actual circumstantial experiences with our parents, with our partners, where asking for help or looking like we don't have it all together was not met with compassion or support, but rather withdrawal of love. So, looking back over how I reacted over these 8 months, I've been able to admit a lot more clearly to myself how much I have built the majority of my business over the last 6 years with absolutely no insight, mentorship, or outside support. Like, really, y'all. I got coach training at the very beginning, and I got 6 months of business training within that I then like took and ran with. But I have not worked with any like business coaches. I have not been in any mentorship groups. I have purely built my business off of self-trust and just taking the next step that seemed to make sense to me. And up until now, I had been able to find ways to make that work. I would not say necessarily financially smart ways, but a big piece of why I did it that way, if you look back at my trauma with my family, my trauma with my spouse, was I just did not feel safe letting other people into that world. And I didn't feel safe being in groups with other women that were in the work, in the entrepreneurial space, because growing up, we talked about this on my episode in Human Design with the amazing Deanna. As a manifester, like I always experienced women as being very competitive with me. And even last year, I think it was actually in 2025, I believe, I met an older woman that I was like excited to receive mentorship from, kind of opened up to that, felt very relieved to finally have someone like a peer that I could look to. And it ended up being a narcissist dynamic that I had to break off. So my previous experiences with older women mentoring me or groups of women, it just felt too intimidating, terrifying, and overwhelming to add that to building a business. And so I really learned and trained myself to hold the heavy parts on my own. Um, I often, too, when I'd shared ideas with other people, I would often experience people like dismissing them or invalidating my ideas. And so I just learned like, I'm not going to share my ideas with other people, which many of you will relate to in the experience of considering divorce. And so because of that, I developed a very strong belief in myself of trusting myself entirely when it came to my business, just based off of like gut intuition, while underdeveloping my structure of having, an infrastructure to support me in tracking numbers and having data and research to back things up. Because honestly, hello, executive function nightmare for an ADHD brain. That just was something I did not enjoy, that I struggled with and didn't want to do. So that all coalesced, kind of perfect storm piece, into what I experienced last September. Like knowing this about me now, you guys can see so clearly how this idea comes in. It feels exciting. It seems to fit with, some of the ideals and goals I have for my business. And so let's go for it. Let's try it. Now, the bridge to you all and your own experience with considering divorce is that when you find yourselves considering divorce, you also often fall into this exact trap of the trauma response of hyper independence and isolation, and feeling like you have to solve the massively terrifying riddle of your future. Like, what are my finances going to look like? What's the childcare going to look like? What's my emotional survival going to look like? Entirely in secret, because you're deeply terrified that if you let other people in and you tell them, they will just validate your deepest fear that you're not going to make it out in the wilderness if you leave, which for so many of us, right? That's that like excruciating feeling of, I'm unhappy and miserable here. This is not working. And yet the thought of leaving, there's nobody there supporting me or telling me like, you can do this. And if I do share it with other people, what most of us experience, right? The very real reality that most of us experience is that when we do reach out to others, they just share their fear back to us, or how it's not going to work out. I can't tell you the amount of women I've talked to who, when they've gone to their own mothers to say, my marriage is not working, I am miserable, I am dying here, their mothers are like, well, what will you do? Or, oh my gosh, you can't leave this. There's no, okay, let me help you figure this out. There's got to be a way. Instead, it's their own fear projected onto you. And so it's understanding too, once again, through that patriarchal lens, that for us as women, when we go to make decisions that go against the norm, rarely do we find support. I did not find someone at the men's club when I decided to start my business that was like, oh, I'd love to give you some seed money here. Oh, and you're interested in starting your own entrepreneurial coaching? I know a dude that can help you with that. Like, we as women often have to figure things out on our own when we go on a route that nobody else is taking. And because when we reach out and get negative feedback, instead of support, we often find that we have to isolate and shoulder the weight of the stress and the confusion on our own. And why this is such a bummer is because, although I could not see this back when I made this decision, right, where I'm like, maybe it might be great to have some numbers. Maybe it might be great to talk to somebody else. At the time, I just was operating off of what I knew. Same thing for those of you considering divorce. When you can't compare what's your ideas to somebody else's, when you can't see other custody schedules, when you can't hear what somebody else's moving out experience was like, that makes it really difficult. Just like me, jumping out to Substack, you're just kind of shooting in the dark, hoping that what you're deciding to do will work. Now, I'm not going to go into too many of the like solutions on these. I'm really just trying to like point out these parallels. Although I do have to say right here, I think this is why the community is so huge, because we need safe spaces of women going through the same things that will let us be around them non-competitively without needing us to make certain choices to validate their own, which is what most of our mothers need. Okay, now for the second parallel that I found. So the first one was that we have this hyper-independence trauma response that many of us experience. The second one is, and this one was very, very difficult for me over these 8 months, y'all, is that I experienced a weaponization of my own self-trust. So let me break this down for you. The foundational belief that gave me the strength to leave my marriage 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago now, was I can trust myself over everyone and everything else. This was the belief that I had to believe in, like body, mind, heart, soul, to step away from a marriage where I was a stay-at-home mom, where I had no career, no way to make income. I had to go fully off of my gut, trusting that like I was going to figure it out and that I could trust myself. And what was so painful about the growth I've experienced this last 8 months was that this dynamic with my business, that belief, I can trust myself over everyone and everything else, actually became the very like knotted, tight point that all my fear and doubt was circling around. And that's because I had made my decision to go to Substack from this thought of like, yep, this seems like a good move. I can trust myself. We're going to do it. Ergo, admitting that Substack wasn't working for my brain equated to I can't trust myself. And that may seem like such an illogical jump, but that was what my brain was experiencing. To say Substack didn't work meant I can't trust myself. And that was too terrifying of an idea to even go near. Like I just, at multiple points, during that 8-month journey, I couldn't allow myself to go there yet. And I really believe, because I couldn't see that piece yet, because my brain had made those two things equal, all that was left to me was to then cycle back up into the hyper individuation. And so then I was trapped in this loop. Okay. I couldn't see reality for what it was. I couldn't be honest about reality, because if I was honest about reality, then I'd have to admit I made a mistake. And for some reason, which I will explain later, my brain was making I made a mistake mean I can't trust myself. And if I can't trust myself, and that's the belief I've built my entire last 6 years of existence on, whoa, right, y'all? Do you see the existential terror that is being created by this? So when I go there, I can't land there. So I loop back up into the hyper individuation of it just must be me. I just need to surrender more. I just need to be more patient. I just need to wait it out. Pulling countless tarot spreads, so much journaling, just like digesting, trying to figure out what is it that the universe wants from me, because I trusted myself and this isn't working out. Those of you right now in your marriages, do you hear how this is the same rhetoric? I'm thinking specifically of one woman in my community who I'm like, I know this episode is going to land so hard for her, Because for some of you, maybe not all of you, but for some of you, getting married, way back when, it's like this idea that, well, I trusted myself back then. I said yes because I believed my judgment was sound then. But now I'm facing a marriage that is not working. What the fuck does that mean about my judgment? Right? Your brain starts to play this dangerous trick on you where it says, if I admit this marriage isn't working or has failed, it must mean I was wrong then. And if I was wrong then, how on earth can I trust myself now? And do you see how it's just like I can just watch this little loop just digging out our foundation, just pulling the ground out from underneath us, like the very thing you need to be able to stand on to just like make a clean decision and go, okay, this isn't working. Like we can't, because our brain is just pulling the sand and the dirt out from underneath us with this loop. And what's really happening here by staying in this loop of try harder, surrender more, keep waiting, that's really our ego trying to protect itself from having to admit, oh, I made a choice that didn't work out, from having to like step into that self-doubt, which I just want to say so clearly, like, if anybody understands how difficult this is, it's me. It just came through 8 months of doing this. So I say this with so much compassion, right? That this is a deep psychological process for many of us, like a protective self process. So in that moment, what are you all doing in your marriages? You're staying in your marriages, and you're convincing yourself that waiting and overfunctioning will one day fix it. Because to admit failure feels like a total collapse of your inner authority. And not only that, right, but also a total collapse of like all the dreams you had for that venture. Boy, have I been grieving. Also, like, fuck, I really thought Substack was going to be this thing that was going to, lead to this life that I was really excited about and these other opportunities that I had. And now here I am 8 months later having to be like, nope, that didn't work. And actually, all those things I wanted to be experiencing and like being closer to, I'm actually further away from. That takes a lot of being able to like be with yourself and see it to do that. And that's why it was triggered at a deep enough level for me that I wasn't able to do that. I stayed on Substack for what would end up being 8 months because at some level, admitting that it had failed, and I would offer, maybe not for the entire 8 months, right? It was probably more like 3 to 4 months where I could have really caught that data and made a decision, but I couldn't because it felt like a confusingly terrifying admission that maybe I couldn't trust my own inner authority. And I just found myself waiting for that situation to change so that I wouldn't have to face the terrifying thought of I trusted myself and maybe I made a mistake. And, whether we call it a mistake or not, I don't, if that word feels good for you, use it. If it doesn't, don't. I have found for me, I've been very, very anti calling things mistakes. And through this process, I've been becoming more comfortable with being able to be like, yep, I made a mistake. Based off of the limited knowledge I had in my business at the time, I made a choice that actually didn't pan out the way I thought it would. So the third parallel that I found was around us having, deeper programming in our histories. And for me specifically, having heavy cult programming from religion, I would also offer, as many of you are going to learn over the next 2 episodes coming in the podcast, many of us have the cult of patriarchy programming. And, subcategory of the cult of patriarchy is misogyny. So there is lots of programming that is running all of this behind the scenes for me. So let's dive into my side of the journey. Looking back now, I can see. And honestly, here's the other gift. Like, yes, maybe these 8 months did not go how I wanted them to go financially in my business. But wow, did having to dive into all of this really, I may not have gotten the financial rewards, but thanks to having a therapist and doing a lot of deep trauma work, which was needed during all of this, I learned so much about where this is all rooted. And for me, the childhood trauma of the sexual abuse with my father and then the narcissistic abuse from my mother absolutely conditioned me to believe at a deep level that I was responsible for my parents' emotions and behaviors. This then got extremely amplified in the dynamic that is present with God in Mormonism, because cult conditioning teaches you that reality is a direct reflection of your spiritual worthiness. And so if things go wrong, you are bad. When you are raised with a very conditional God that has all these rules, and if you'll follow them, things will work out for you, your brain picks up on that pattern. And then that was absolutely reinforced with my parents as well. And y'all might say, wait, but you left Mormonism 6 years ago. Y'all, that stuff runs deep. The programming we experience in childhood with our parents, the programming we pick up in our formative years from a fundamentalist religion is still unconsciously running. And now looking back over those 8 months, what I realized was I was still unconsciously projecting this same dynamic in my adult relationship with what I call the universe. And so what that looked like for my, in childhood, brainwashed into a cult brain that still has that programming in it was my business is down and that or I'm not getting as many 90 minutes, or I don't understand what's happening. It must be that I have missed something. I internalized it must be that I need to be more patient. I must need to surrender more. I need to keep seeking for an answer. But notice, in seeking for that answer, my brain was completely not looking at the answer right in front of me. It led me nowhere in the realm of admitting, oh, I trusted myself and made a decision and it just didn't work out. I could not see or admit that. I could not just go, reality, oh, Apple Podcast, because of my RSS feed changing, has now shifted the algorithm. Notice how that is just a mathematical, neutral piece of just a functional, like, this is life, rather than what my brain had been trained to do, which was like, this must be an anthropomorphized choice of the universe. And I just have to say at this point right here, y'all, fuck, I hate what cults do to our brains. That right there, that I could not see a simple change sitting right in front of me and instead turned it into an entire big, like, me and the universe kind of thing, that comes directly from cults. And this parallel of how I was interacting with this whole situation with Substack is honestly just like what it felt like for me in childhood. I was trapped in childhood, endlessly trying to figure out how to please my parents in order to be safe, taking responsibility for everything while at the same time, at a deep, deep, suppressed subconscious level, feeling immensely uncared for and unsafe. And that's what triggered in my brain with all of this, and what defaulted to running the same programming here. If I just do this, if I just do this, if I just do this, one day it will finally switch and I will be loved, or I will be seen, or this choice I've made will work out. Now, the reality check on all of this was that 2 months ago, Quinn, in a passing Voxer message, just happened to be like, hey, 'Cause she'd seen me like internalizing and doing all of this deep, 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 deep work around this, like thinking there was more deep work I needed to do for this to shift. And she's like, babe, do you think it's just like maybe your move to Substack somehow affected the algorithm? Like maybe your numbers are down just because it's not showing it the same way, or maybe it's because you paywalled the podcast. And y'all, I at the time was like, what? I had never even considered this. And this was like, 2, 3 maybe months ago. I think it was 2 months ago. So I'd already been like 6 months deep in all of the brain stuff. And it was her basically saying like, hey, maybe this isn't a spiritual crisis. Maybe this isn't a mistaking of like, you can't trust yourself. Maybe it's just a broken algorithm. Maybe it's just a, numbers thing. And also, now that I've researched more, it also was me not fully understanding what my podcast is and how it functions best in my business. All neutral things that don't actually have to deal with me, fundamentally being a bad person or not being able to trust myself. Now, let's bridge this to all of you and considering divorce. Whew, you may not have come from a cult, a religious cult, but you definitely, especially if you were raised in the US, and to varying degrees in other countries, you have been raised in the cult of patriarchy. And in the cult of patriarchy, women are conditioned to believe that if the family is unhappy, if your parents are unhappy, if the husband is unfulfilled, or the marriage is not working, it is a direct reflection of your failure as the emotional anchor, as the one that is meant to help everybody feel connected, happy, and grounded. So I'm going to call it the cult brain because I called it my cult brain. So what your cult brains do in this experience is go, my marriage must be failing because I am not showing up enough. Maybe I'm not communicating correctly. Maybe I am not a good enough wife. Maybe I'm not a good enough mother. Or maybe I am breaking some cosmic divine rule that I need to figure out. When the reality, as I talk about so much on this podcast, could just be two humans who had certain values back when they met, have now grown apart in a structure that is not built to sustain their individual evolution. Right? Whoa, do we go? I mean, here I am saying, I'm sharing with you guys my 8 months down the crazy train loop of the hyper independence and the internalizing and, fearing myself. But I know many of you that have spent years in this cycle, years mistaking what is outside of you, right? What is just kind of what is the neutralness of maybe these are just two people that aren't a fit anymore, for a deep personal spiritual failing. And in the exact way that I believe a failing marriage isn't a cosmic sign of unworthiness or a character flaw or something wrong with either of you, it just is what it is. I am having to accept and also give myself the same grace that a business choice to move to Substack isn't somehow a sign of my own character flaws or unworthiness. Sometimes we just make a mistake. Sometimes a human relationship simply runs out of the things that originally were making it work in the beginning. And one of the biggest things I want you guys to hopefully take away from this episode is this idea that it is not sin, it's just data, especially for those of you that are raised fundamentally, okay? It's like, why can't we have this thought of like, okay, we tried that, really went, for many of you, went all in on that, gave it our all, tried it, didn't work, let's pivot. Now, let's go into the fourth parallel that I have for you guys. So this is where I really started to dig in as I've been looking back over everything to just how much this experience like absolutely paralleled going through a divorce for me. Like wading through this business choice failure has felt like going through divorce for me all over again. But in a different way with a different feeling that I'm going to describe. And mainly because the heart and soul of it is just having to admit that a choice I made didn't work. And for those of us, like I said, that come from the cult brain, that is actually really scary, especially for those of us that learn perfectionism and having all the answers is what keeps us safe. Admitting, oh, this didn't work sounds so simple, but for many of us, it creates a reaction in our bodies that feels like life or death. It really feels that existential. Now, with this feeling like a divorce, in some ways it was obviously, in some ways it's easier, but in some ways it was harder than my marital divorce. And I wanted to highlight one of the ways it was because I found it really interesting that in my marital divorce, I now see that there were parts of me that could point at my partner and really believe that once he was gone, things would be better. And, don't get me wrong. I do, looking back, that was the case for my marriage. There were things that definitely improved. We just had fundamental differences that were not a fit. I did not know myself well when I got married to my first husband. Bless his and my hearts. But with this one, with this business, getting divorced from this business choice, I had no external person to be able to look at and go, you are part of the problem. There was no one to leave in this experience. It was me and me. The responsibility fell entirely squarely on my shoulders. And that was so difficult because it felt like admitting that I had made a mistake was going to mean having to sacrifice my relationship with myself. And that is just a massive, horrific side effect for those of us brainwashed in cults into the very black or white thinking. There, if you're triggered enough, there's not much of a gray. And that's what my brain was operating in. And that's why the work these 8 months was just really painful and confusing for me. And why it is for so many of us that come from religions that program us to believe that the world is understandable and definable with rules that God has established. And if you just follow those rules and figure them out, you'll be safe. I was still operating under that reality, that paradigm. I had changed the flavor of it. I was calling it the universe. But unbeknownst to me, I was still operating thinking, if I just trust myself, things will always work out. Things will always go the way or better than the way I was hoping. And this was my first big, glaring test. I don't know if we wouldn't even call it a test, but just like experience in life to have that belief really run up against life in a deeper way. In a way that has, in so many ways over the last 8 months, honestly, helped me grow up. I look at what I've done these last 8 months and I'm like, man, there was just a lot of developmental, growing up into understanding a lot more about the unpredictability about life that you just don't learn in cults. And although it was really difficult, I have to say, I'm honestly, and this is always the silver lining piece for me. And just something that I'm really grateful that I have learned and developed is that no matter what I'm going through, I often am able to find the growth. And this did help me find the growth of realizing, nope, sometimes you make a decision and it doesn't go the way you thought. Sometimes you think you figured out life and you think you know what the next step's going to be, and you take it, and that's not how life is. It's not. I am becoming, I think also I've come into a much more grown up, more, I don't want to call it realistic, but it does feel more grounded in reality relationship with life, of realizing that life is far more mysterious and unexplainable than I trust myself and everything works out. Or, works out. I want to reframe that. I trust myself and everything works out exactly how as I expected it to. Let me put it that way. And you can see how that I still believe like things work out. I really do, because that just feels so good. But I'm realizing more and more they may not work out on the time frame that I thought, or with the expectations of the ways that I thought it was going to. I moved to Substack because I believed it would help me be more financially safe and stable. And it ended up doing the exact opposite of that. And when it did, it just caused my brain to default back to my religious and patriarchal conditioning and internalize that as being something wrong with me. Now, let me bridge this all to your experiences with divorce. I'm sure many of you can relate to this. Many of us go into marriage believing it will be one thing, only to find out that it is something else entirely. I don't want to go too much into a rabbit hole on this. I mean, this is just like talk about, I feel like in many ways, many of us get bait and switched with the idea of not only marriage, but also what raising children is going to be like as a woman. And when we find out that it is something else entirely, we are completely destabilized. We are simultaneously trying to grapple with, wait, did I lie to myself? Did somebody else lie to me? We are grieving the loss of a dream. Okay, is it always going to be this way? Can it change? Can it go back to what it was? Was what it was what I thought it was going to be? It is an incredibly destabilizing time. And during that time, we often find ourselves, this is what I've heard from so many of you who have been relating to my article on The Good Guy. If your husband isn't overtly toxic in the ways we've been taught to think it's okay to leave a marriage for, and it's not easy for you to go, yep, these are the reasons to leave. If the marriage is instead just stagnant or incompatible or missing key pieces that you really need, and there's no villain to pin it on, the perfectionist mind turns inward, and I often see that it cannibalizes itself, right? If there's no villain, I must be the failure. And I really want to, hopefully, through sharing my own experience over these 8 months, and you guys seeing, because when you're outside of the story, you can see it. I'm sure so many of you are like, yes, Britta, just make the change, right? I want to challenge you guys with my own realization that it took me 8 agonizing months of spinning in self-hatred and confusion to say the simple words, I tried this, it didn't work, and I need to pivot. I want you to try on those words when thinking about your marriage. Giving yourself some of that grace of realizing that in life, it doesn't have to be that someone has to be the bad guy and someone has to be the good guy. It doesn't have to be black and white. It can literally exist in this messy gray area of life of, wow, I thought that was going to work out, And it actually went the complete opposite way, or I thought getting married to this person was going to be this. It's actually turned out to be this. And accepting, I need to pivot. I hope in some small way this episode gives you permission to start allowing yourself to pivot. Now, let's go to the 5th and final parallel, which was The moment when I finally was able to face, um, to really face the dragon, to face what just sounds, for those of us that have not done deep work, it's like, oh, the idea of like facing a concept in our mind or facing a belief sounds so simple, but the intensity of it emotionally makes it feel like facing a dragon. So the moment for me where I was finally able to do this was through tarot. About 2 weeks ago with Quinn, I reached out to her and, Quinn's been coaching me for these 8 months. She's still my personal coach. But there's an incredible respect that I love to give, that I'm also always like trying to navigate, and that I also want coaches that are coaching me to navigate, which is respecting when somebody's ready to see things and when they are just needing to be supported and held in waiting in the confusion. And that's the beauty too. I do want to say this, y'all, that, yes, there are parts of my brain that are like, these 8 months, why did it have to take us 8 months? I know I see this in so many of you with the regret of like, why did it take me so long to decide to get, for those of you, especially I see this in women who decide when they make the decision to get divorced, then there's a lot of regret that comes up because you like see it clearly. You're like, why did it take me so long? But there were so many processes for me happening over those 8 months. Thankfully, I did have a therapist. I knew I was going through some tough stuff in 2025. And so I got back in with my therapist, and we were able to do a lot of deep trauma work over those 8 months. And a lot of the reason why we were able to do that deep of work is because I wasn't moving. I was just kind of staying down in that space. And I really want to highlight this piece because this goes back to what I've said before of I think your journey is always ultimately unfolding exactly how it's meant to. And I can look back and go, yeah, okay, Substack financially was a mistake, but also the gift of that mistake is that it led me into 8 months of deep internal work that really dredged up a lot of things. Like over these last 8 months, acknowledged how deeply tired I am to my therapist. Here I'd launched this thing that I was really hoping was going to shift things. And now I was having to like, okay, it's not only not shifting things, but things are, I'm putting in air quotes, getting worse financially. I was able to finally say aloud, like how much I want to be rescued, how hard I've felt pushed my whole life to be the one who holds it all together for everybody. And in acknowledging these parts of myself in a very, very vulnerable, raw part of my journey, I have been able to come into more grace and compassion and honestly, some forced releasing of control. So it has been a very, very deep shedding in not being able to see this yet. So always remember that even in the moments when you can't face the dragon, you are doing deep and powerful and important work. But 2 weeks ago, I was ready. I could feel it. I asked her to read tarot for me. And honestly, a part of me had known. I had not asked her to read tarot for me in these 8 months, at least in this deep way about this specific question around Substack, because I just didn't, I was very afraid that the cards would tell me what I didn't want to hear and that I would need to make a change that some part of me subconsciously knew I wasn't ready for. But 2 weeks ago I was. And as she started pulling the cards, they came up and said exactly what parts of me knew they were going to say. The young fantasy, healing fantasy parts of me that wanted some miraculous thing to change and for this to work out and everything to just magically get better. Got to see that the cards were saying, nope, this is not going to get better. This is what it is. It just beautifully, through images, depicted all of that. And you know what happened, y'all? I had a massive CPTSD reaction. I had 3 different parts of my body that just completely seized up. My throat went super tight, and I was able to identify this belief that gets lodged in my throat of, "I have to hold it all together." Then my stomach, just like the bottom dropped out of it, and I identified, like, down in there was this just, like, deep abandonment and this belief that even though I'm exhausted, it all depends on me. And then I felt my heart just completely collapsing in, just like the walls and the barricades coming up. And this thought that was, there is no one coming to save you. And I felt the huge emotional, at the time, I didn't even have the words. I just knew, like, fuck, I am losing it. And I wanted to run. I really wanted to run from Quinn. I felt so much shame. I felt completely overwhelmed by the just deluge of sensation. And I even said to her, I'm not doing well. I think I need to just go to my room and cry. And I'm so grateful for Quinn, because in that moment, she so gently was like, I will absolutely, let you do that. But I also just want you to know that you don't have to be alone. And if you want me to, I would love to stay. And thank goodness at that moment, I was able to be like, okay, I will, I will let you stay with me. And it was through her secure attachment to me that we were able to walk through those feelings in my body together. I was able to stay with these just intense, really painful beliefs that I know come from my childhood. The thought that I have to hold it all together, that is absolutely linked to my abuse with my father and my narcissistic mother. The thought the feeling in my stomach that I am exhausted, and yet it still all depends on me. Like, I can't, I have to do this, comes from my childhood. And then the thought, there's no one coming to save you, that as well. And I don't know why, I've thought back on, like, why was this the moment when things shifted? Which I think many of you might ask. So I want you to know that I think and I suspect that this was just a timing thing. Like, more and more as my brain just automatically tries to figure out what we're doing here. What is this life? How does it work? It's fascinated by those questions. But I really just think this was a timing thing. Like, it just took the amount of time it took. It took 8 months for me to come through this big, deep growth experience of not being able to, admit that something wasn't working that I had picked. And it was just this moment where I honestly, in a lot of ways, my coping mechanisms had been so worn down over the 8 months, my usual defenses, that and there'd been multiple layers of that, by the way, you guys, multiple layers of just having to, like, admit, I can't push through this. I can't force myself to create something new and just launch something else. I am exhausted. It just finally took me to a point where I was ready, that it was like, I'm ready to look the dragon in the eye. And thank goodness that once I did, I had my best friend by my side, and I was able, with the tools of understanding through the lens of CPTSD and my childhood trauma beliefs, I was able to see what it was. And right after I came through that huge emotional flashback, I was able to stay with myself and with her really beautifully. The next step came through. It was just like, there it is. And it was this acknowledgement. It was this acknowledgement really, really deeply for me that the podcast was created from the beginning as a gift to the women who couldn't afford to work with me. And that even though I had moved it to Substack, in some ways deep down, y'all, from a little bit of a seed of fear, right? Like, I need to watch out for myself. I need to take care of myself. I need to create another revenue stream. That ultimately, what is most needed, where it most belongs, where it needs to be, and where it needs to remain, is as a gift. And that led me to being able to say, okay, it's time to let go of keeping the paywall. And as I've been continuing to digest this, I just still feel like I'm at a point now where I can almost like find the curiosity and the absolute like wonder of like, here I thought I went into this with Substack that I was being so business savvy and responsible, opening another revenue stream and putting it behind a paywall, and it actually did the exact opposite for me. And I am learning, this is like the deeper, more adult relationship I'm developing with life. I'm learning how to be able to look at all of the growth I got from that, not abandon myself through the financial stress of it. That's the other piece, y'all. I did so much and I'm still in it. I'm talking about this as if like, yes, the last 8 months I've done a ton of financial belief work and just confronted and seen a lot of my fears around finances. And I'm still in that. But really realizing that life's going to take me all kinds of places. And sometimes when I trust myself and I think it's going to work out one way, it's going to work out a different way. But that ultimately I can stay with myself through all of it, which was something that I'm the most proud of. Yes, I may have isolated for sure. I saw myself isolating, pulling away from people, really getting in my head. But this round of my growth, I didn't abandon myself. In fact, I went deeper into acknowledging how tired I am, how exhausted I am, how much help I need. And ultimately to come out to this point and realize like, oh, okay, I learned through some hard fought, hard dug experience what my podcast really means to me, where it's meant to function and where it belongs in the ethos of my business and ultimately out in the world. Now, for all of you, I want to take this final fifth section and bridge it over to your divorce. Often when you are staying in your marriage, you think you're being very wise and responsible to keep staying and keep trying. And I've seen how sometimes that moment when you finally speak the truth, or you see it for what it is, you say, I want a divorce. Sometimes that doesn't feel like a liberation at first. Instead, it may feel like that somatic crisis you saw come up in my body. It may feel like a CPTSD panic. It may feel like your body really collapsing and tightening and freaking out, the throat tightening under the pressure of holding it all together, the heart shutting down because the loneliness is terrifying, the stomach dropping out of who will be there to take care of me. All your deepest fears from childhood may rise up to meet you. And I want to say that that is the moment where we most need, even though we feel like pulling away in our shame and our fear, that is the moment where we most need to be able to lean in to our best friends, if they are a secure attachment, and our community. And that also helped me see, in thinking about all of you all as I was writing this episode, that that is one of the biggest reasons why the podcast also needs to be free and open permanently, forever going forward. Because for many of you, you may not have a best friend who is a secure attachment, or you may not have a community. But what you will always have is the podcast. That when your system is screaming to isolate, to pull away, to distrust yourself, hopefully my voice and this podcast will be able to stand in for many of you, as my best friend Quinn did for me. I've seen more clearly now that my podcast is really a priceless resource that offers women a secure and safe attachment to lean on when you're processing the panic of choosing yourself in a rebellious act of self-love that goes against the norm. And so just like Quinn did that for me, I really want to make that resource unconditional again. That's like the beautiful silver lining of all of this. There's more. I'm going to share more silver linings, but that's one of the most beautiful is that I realized like, oh, that's what the podcast is. That's what it does. That's the importance of what it does in the world. So that is the big announcement that's coming out of this episode. And at the end of this episode, I'll get into some of the logistics with y'all about what this move is going to look like, what it's going to feel like. But that was really so small in comparison to you all understanding the journey and the process that it's taken to get here. And before I go into all of that, I do want to finish with a couple little pieces that really like touched me today. So I pulled my tarot spread going into writing this episode, recording this episode, y'all. I'm not going to lie. I was feeling it about this episode. This is just a very humbling, vulnerable place to share a mistake from, you know, on such a big a platform that is open. And so I pulled my tarot cards, kind of trying to like get a feel for what they were going to be. And sure enough, I had like I had 3 of Swords and Let Go, and the 9 of Swords from my higher self. So just some acknowledgement of how this was going to trigger things that I'm still processing and trying to understand, and I'm still deep in my own work around. But one of the things that I loved most was, the lean in card was the 4 of Cups, which, if any of you guys know, this card comes up for me a lot, and it was just reminding me to see the cup that has the rainbow. But most of all, the card that really impacted me was that the 8 of Cups came up as my theme. And when Quinn did that tarot spread for me, oh my goodness, did the 8 of Cups come up over and over and over and over again. And so I went and read it, and I really wanted to read the overview for you all just to kind of land and close out this beautiful episode. So I'm reading from the Lightseers Tarot, Chris Ann. And for the 8 of Cups, it says, "She has released her last cup into the sea, and her bowl burning ceremony has come to a close. There were 7 bowls before this one, 7 days and nights to build her new vision for her life, and 7 ceremonies to let go of old habits, feelings, beliefs, and ideas. And while she's not totally sure that she's there yet, she knows she feels more empowered than she ever has before. These rituals have cleansed her heart and spirit, and she understands that she deserves much more than she's been settling for lately. She feels so powerful in this moment that she doesn't even feel compelled to watch that last bowl dip its way into the sea. She knows what fate has in store for it, a complete submerging and then washing away. She knows the water will cleanse any sign of its presence, and that the only thing that will remain is her memory of it. She knows that her memories tend to be stored in her muscles, so she vows to actively create new memories to be called upon and enjoyed. She will enjoy this new memory, the one where her situation holds so little power over her that she walks away before the ritual is even complete. She no longer needs this purification. She chooses her own path, and she is ready to grow beyond this version of herself." Oh, as I read this again, y'all, as I'm reading it now after having recorded this whole episode for y'all, I realized for me, this final, like, this bowl where the situation holds so little power over her that she walks away before the ritual is even complete is this moment of returning my podcast out from a paywall, even when financially things look substantially different than what I had hoped they would. And that's the beauty of really learning and growing through mistakes, trying something and then realizing, okay, we need to pivot and we need to choose something else. And being able to land in a space of, I made a mistake and I learned something. And I will be very clear for all of you that are like, wait, like I am also reaching out and getting business. I am in the process of getting business support around actual data in my business, around numbers. If I am not good at that, if that is not where my executive function ability is strong, then I'm learning, okay, I need to be asking for help. I need to be getting support. But what I love most about this card, and this is, I'll just include this little part on the card where it says, I walk away from negativity and choose myself in a rebellious act of self-love. Just like I said earlier, this for me is a moment of really letting go of the negativity that so many of us spiral into when things aren't working, the shame and the blame and the regret, and going, okay, kind of from a playful, curious place of like, wow, that did not go the way I thought it was going to go. And this makes the most sense for sure. Putting the podcast over on Substack with its RSS feed there really impacted my business negatively. So we're going to reroute that. But also when it talks about actively creating new memories. This is the second piece that I wanted to really leave you guys with this episode with, which is a shout out to a song called Click Clack Symphony by Ray and Hans Zimmer. So I'm really hoping some of you may have heard it and are already like vibing and like, oh my God, Britta's talking about it. But if you haven't heard the song, I found it within the last 2 months, maybe within the last like month, actually. And I love it. I love it. It's been my anthem this last month because it talks so much about moving through depression and confusion and uncertainty while still going out with the girls, while still allowing for rebellious joy, play, and dancing. And for so many of us that grew up with a lot of over responsibility for our parents' feelings and for everyone around us, this is an anthem that calls us out of our isolation and to really ride the ups and downs and the highs and lows of life, still loving ourselves and allowing ourselves to have a rebellious feeling of self-love and joy, even when we're going through hard things. That's been really tough for me at times over these last 8 months. It's been hard. I've seen how much I conditionally love myself. I only want to let myself relax or have joy or play or be silly when I know that I've taken care of everything else. And it's learning that it doesn't have to be an either or, it's an and. I get to go through making mistakes and still find joy. I get to go through figuring things out and things not working out and still rebelliously self-love myself. So definitely go give this one a listen. If you can, I highly recommend. We'll link actually the video. I love watching the video. I especially love the parts at the end where Ray just basically, it's like she's quoting a poem to you. Those words land so beautifully. I also would be super remiss if I didn't highlight that although the last 8 months in many ways for my psyche felt very isolating, I had incredible, immense silver linings of my therapist being there to support me, Quinn supporting me. My coping mechanisms were telling me to isolate, but I had the most just wonderful gift of getting to interact with the women in my community every week, and being with them each week filled my soul and really kept my light burning. Because it was like, even though things financially were not making sense, I really never wavered in knowing that this is my purpose and my passion. Because I was experiencing it all the time in the community with the women. So I want to send like so much love to all of my women in the community. The community has been an incredible support back for me going through this tough period. And then, of course, my partner, Joe. Joe has supported me through this period in ways that I've never been supported by anybody else. He never once tried to get me to distrust myself or tried to fix it or tried to come in and change everything for me. He just kept loving me and supporting me as I found my way through. And he was able to sense and see for me that this was much more multi-layered and deeply faceted than just what it looked like on the surface. I'm grateful that we have figured out a lot more, the important piece of like, oh, all of this changed because we moved stuff to Substack. Yes, there it is. But immensely grateful to have had people that in my life, instead of mocking me for that or shaming me or trying to just be like, we need to change this. This isn't working, Britta. They respected that I was going to make the choices I was going to make and I was going to figure them out. And I'm also so grateful, just so grateful, y'all, to have this podcast to be able to share this with you. I love knowing that the podcast gives to all of you, but the beautiful thing about it as well is that it's very reciprocal. Being able to come here and share this process, being able to talk through and find these patterns and share these patterns with you is deeply, deeply nurturing for me as well. So thank you. Thank you for the gift of listening and spending time with me and my story today. Now, before we end the episode, let me just give you a few logistics for the pivot that we have happening with Substack and the podcast. So let me talk to you about what some of the things are that are going to stay the same and what some of the changes will be. And as big of a switch as this sounds, honestly, for a lot of you, it's not going to feel like that big of a change. For those of you listening for Apple and Spotify, there'll be really no major changes in how you're digesting the podcast, like the platform that you're using, except that the paywalls will be gone and all of my episodes will now be fully accessible. You may notice potentially some glitches this week as I transfer the RSS feed back over to Buzzsprout. That's where we were previously, and that is where my RSS feed will now live from here on out. That is what seems to work best and it play most nicely with Apple and Spotify, which is huge for me. The majority of my listeners are on Apple, so many of you over there will not see any differences. For my free Substack subscribers and my Substack subscribers, all of you in general over in Substack, I'm still keeping Substack, okay? I still see it as an incredible platform for my writing, which is important to me and something that I do really want to enjoy and be able to spend more time with. I've seen how posts that I've written have been able to impact women differently. Sometimes when you read it, it's different than hearing it. I know I'm a very visual learner, so I'm absolutely going to keep Substack, especially too, I love all the functionality of being able to connect in with many of you there. As those of you who have listened to the podcast episodes before this know, I mean, that's where I met my amazing Vanessa Kulik Price that I had on the podcast. So I see it still as an amazing platform to meet other people, to get to drop in and build community for myself there. So with that in mind, my assistant is still going to continue posting the podcast audio and video there. So it will still be sent out to your inbox every Tuesday. The previous paywalled episodes are now also completely free. Now, to my yearly and monthly paid subscribers over on Substack, for you, there are some big changes, obviously, because you came to Substack and subscribed with me so that you could get access to podcast episodes. And now I'm changing those podcast episodes being paywalled. So what is going to stay the same, let's start there, is you will get to keep your commenting privileges. So I'm still going to have comments only come from paid subscribers over on Substack. I have loved being able to get to connect with many of you over there. I actually have this incredible artwork up on my wall right now that was sent to me by a subscriber over in the UK. So this piece here of having subscribers that want to connect with me in a deeper level, that I love about Substack. The podcast was not a good fit, but that I love. And it has meant a lot to me because it's a weird kind of format to send your podcast out into the world. And over on Apple and Spotify, I have really no way to have people comment back to you besides those comments that everybody gets to see. So my paid subscribers will still have the ability to comment on all of the episodes. And you will also still get the behind the scenes hot drop notes. So those are when I'm just like driving in my car and I'm thinking about something and I just riff it through an audio message. Those will still be there. But what is going to change as I was sitting with, okay, podcast is now open. What do I want to give my amazing Substack subscribers instead? I have decided to give you access to what I'm kind of calling a vault, basically, where I'm going to be opening up resources that I've only ever used and shared with my one-on-one clients, including this incredible workbook. For those of you watching the video, you'll be able to see it, that I designed back in 2021, I believe. I just never released it. I actually never even gave this workbook to any of my one-on-one clients. It just was this beautiful, it's over 100 pages of this just beautiful worksheets. And it's actually goes along with videos and podcast episodes that I used with my one-on-one clients when I first started coaching. And I have to say, this work is really some of my most clean and foundational work out of everything I've done. That's kind of the gift of me having done, 6 years of this work now, is like I'm really deep into a lot of deep concepts, but sometimes that's not what you need. Sometimes what you really need is just the foundational work. And so I realized in looking back over what I could bring to y'all, I was like, ooh, yes, these are the building blocks that I would really want those of you that are coming to this work right now, or maybe those of you that are like, I'm still feeling really stuck, Britta, even with everything you've talked about, I can't seem to make the switches. These are the building blocks that I want you to know and come back to. Now, these resources won't drop until a little later this month because as I was looking through the workbook, I realized I want to update it a little bit to make it more functional. This workbook was built for women that were going to be working with me one-on-one. And since I won't be working with you one-on-one necessarily, I wanted to change it some. But this is the other exciting pivot, an exciting announcement, is that I may not be able to work with you, in an intensive 3-month container one-on-one, but I am going to introduce and try out doing one live Q&A a month for my paid Substack subscribers. And I will also be doing one live coaching call on Zoom. So that's something I was really excited as I was sitting thinking, what's other value that I could bring you guys now that the podcast is moving off of Substack in this paywalled way? This is really it. I don't really have anywhere else in my work. This is not stuff that I have on the community. I don't really have something like this that feels, this is probably the closest I come to what I would consider to be more of a course. Lots of other coaches have put out courses. That's an area that I've never really put out publicly. I'm thinking right now, like I have an entire, a big, massive course that I have all the videos recorded for that I may release someday in the future. Now is not the time. But this is a perfect example of something that I had more as a course that I was only giving to my one-on-one clients that I think would be an amazing resource to be giving to all of you that are my paid subscribers on Substack. Now, along with those opportunities to drop into some Q&A sessions and to also be able to do live coaching with me. And we'll just see how those go. We'll see if those are a good fit. I'm a little excited and also nervous about the live coaching. I do this in my community with my women, but with many of them, I've already met them. They have to apply. I know a little bit about their backstory. And so I'm interested to see how being able to coach some of you that maybe I haven't met through Substack, what that'll be like for you. Now, logistically, just remember that all of this is going to be dropping later this month. And as my paid, yearly or monthly subscribers, you're going to be receiving your own paid subscriber only emails that'll give you the details of how to access these materials and when those calls will be. But for today, I really wanted to give you at least one thing that you could walk away from this episode with. So later this evening, if you are listening to the podcast on Tuesday, you will receive an email, my paid subscribers, both monthly and yearly, with a special audio from the vault. That's what I'm calling it. That will be a 22-minute guided flashback management that I recorded for my one-on-one clients back in 2024. At the time, you guys know 2024 was a big year for me in learning about CBTSD. When I first started managing my CBTSD, I would use Pete Walker's 13 steps. Like, his list was a lifesaver, but I found myself wishing that I could have someone actually read those to me instead of having to walk myself through it myself. And that is where this audio came out of. So you will find that in your email inbox later this evening. You'll be able to access it there. And I'm really hopeful and excited that that will be like a perfect first resource for you. You'll be able to download it, keep it on your phone, and use it whenever you need it. A couple final logistics are that I am not accepting any more yearly or legacy builder subscriptions anymore. At the moment, right now, I just really want to preserve my absolute freedom to change and pivot as life evolves, as I'm seeing with this exact moment. And so I don't really want anybody locking in on a yearly subscription, thinking that they're getting one thing and then us having to switch again. So I will only be going forward with people that want to do monthly subscriptions. And for my yearly, specifically for my yearly or legacy subscribers, or any of my subscribers that subscribed pre-June 2nd of 2026, for you specifically, if this shift, what I'm explaining, the new resources, letting the podcast go out from behind the paywall, I just want to say so clearly that if this shift in resources does not match the value that you originally invested your money into when you signed up with me, I absolutely want you to DM me on Substack and I will work out a refund with you, a prorated one based on when you joined. So know that if you're coming to the end of this episode and you're like, no, I don't want any of those resources, I just wanted the podcast, not a problem. DM me, we will figure it out. All right, y'all. That's what I've got today. I am just so grateful to have this episode and this shift. Holy shit, y'all. This shift finally recorded in the books. All right, that's what I've got today for y'all, babes. I just have to say real quick that we have some amazing episodes that are going to be coming this month with me and Quinn. Yes, you heard me correct. Quinn is coming back to the podcast. She's been very busy with nursing school. And so she's been focused there. But this summer, she has got a lighter course load, and I am beyond excited. For those of you that have heard episodes with me and Quinn before, they're some of my favorites. I just love the way our energy jives and zigs and zags with each other. And those of you that have seen on Substack may have seen I've been reading The Creation of Patriarchy and The Creation of Feminist Consciousness. Quinn has as well. I reached out to her. I was like, please read these and please come on the podcast and talk with me about them. So those are going to be the conversations you guys are going to get to enjoy over the next couple weeks. So that's just a little sneak peek of what's to come. Sending you all tons of love. Have a great week. Till next Tuesday.